All right, good morning, everyone. Y'all, some of you have seen my dog and pony show before, so I did try to make a few changes. All right, so what we're talking about today are the agreements Neil and David mentioned. We're going to talk about authorization of funds and what's needed for each phase. And as a slight bonus, I know y'all would like to hear about this, the TIP and utility agreements on DOT projects, I just want to reference those because those are agreements with municipalities that we need to have in place before DOT can authorize funds. So I just want to kind of put a plug in for those at the end of this presentation. All right, so our general local project requirements. Federal aid funding is cost reimbursement. You all spend the money and then we reimburse you for eligible cost. We reimburse you at the rate that we agreed to in the agreement. Usually that's 80% federal funds, 20% non-federal match. Federal highways must authorize the work before you begin on that phase of work. I'll have another slide that shows that a little more clearly. And locally administered projects means that you as a municipality deliver the project. You're hiring your consultants, you're acquiring right-of-way, you're letting the construction contract. DOT's responsibility is to provide oversight, make sure you're complying with all the requirements so that we can reimburse you at the end of the work. So here is a sequence of authorization and work. I know sometimes I get a lot of questions about this. The authorization from federal highways is sort of like a mother may I. You need to ask permission before you can start the work that you're wanting to get reimbursed for. Once you get authorization, you perform the work per the agreement, and then you can get reimbursed. So we are talking about authorization today and what things you need to accomplish in order to get the funding authorized. But even if you get the funds authorized, there's no guarantee of reimbursement if you don't comply with the terms of the agreement. All right, this is a pretty high-level overview of all the steps, the deliverables that are needed in relation to each authorization. So if you start at the bottom, the first step is always programming, and David already talked about that, programming the project in this step. The next step is the agreement. And once you have those two done, then you can move to preliminary engineering authorization. And so as you go up the mountain or the ladder, you can see each of the items in blue are deliverables. We need to have those items before you can get the next phase of funding authorization. The items in gray are sort of your process steps. You may have to hire a professional engineering firm in order to get an environmental document completed. You'll have to go out and buy right-of-way or acquire right-of-way before we can provide you with a right-of-way certification. And then, okay. There we go. The next step of move construction authorization at the bottom, so you can see everything that has to happen after construction authorization in order to close out the project. I know we're all trying to get to construction authorization, but please remember there are several things that have to happen after that in order to get reimbursed. And let me jump back. So the other thing about this is if you want to get reimbursed for a phase, you can't go past the authorization arrow until you have that authorization. So in other words, if you want to get reimbursed for PE, you can't go out and procure your professional services before you have that authorization. For right-of-way, if you want to get reimbursed for right-of-way, you can't go out and start acquiring right-of-way until you have that right-of-way authorization. All right, so programming. David already talked about this. Everything has to be programmed in the MTIP and in the STIP. The MPO takes the lead on this. The programming includes the scope of the project, what kind of funding is on it, the amounts and the federal fiscal year that the projects are programmed in. So let's look at one of the projects. And Laura, I'm picking on Huntersville because we talked about this last week. So this is a project, a local project that Huntersville has. You can see, tells you exactly where the project's located. Does this work? Yeah. The description here, the town, the STIP number, very important. And then over here, this is the type of funding that's on the project. So you can see it's BGDA and then L for local. And these are the phases that are funded. And notice the PE is programmed, but it's all local funds. So we know that the city is going to take care of all those costs. We don't need to have an agreement because we're not reimbursing them any funding. It's also showing the PE in 19, and that's really just to show us, it's just a placeholder really. We're more interested in the funding that's showing in 20 and 21. So right away is programmed in fiscal year 2020, construction in 2021. Remember, federal fiscal year starts October 1st. So fiscal year 2020 starts this October 1st, 2019. It ends September 30th, 2020. So today we're talking about fiscal year 19, which began last October and will end this September. When we get a request for an agreement, we go and look at the STIP to make sure that what you all are requesting is what has been programmed. If you come to us and ask for an agreement and say, I'm getting PE reimbursed, we'll go look at the STIP and we say, well, no, you're not, because there are no federal funds programmed for PE. It's all local. Same way, if there wasn't right-of-way showing up here and you said you were getting right-of-way reimbursed, we'd tell you to go back to your MPO and talk to them because somehow there's been a miscommunication. We're also we look at the funding amounts, but we don't look at them too closely because the STIP does round. So if the MPO is giving you an amount that is less than, falls into less than $1,000, they round it. So we do try to go back to what the MPO gives you, the notification from the MPO, this is the amount of funding we've been awarded. So it's really important to know how to look at the STIP and see how your project is programmed in there before you ask for the agreement. Sorry. All right, so when we get to the agreement, it's executed between DOT and the local government. It has all the provisions that you need to comply with, all 22 pages. It includes the funding, the timeframes, scope of work, and responsibilities. And generally what we are doing is kind of giving you, we're usually giving people 5 years if they have multiple phases programmed. So from the date of authorization of the first phase, you have 5 years to complete the work. Most projects can get done in that time. If you need more time, we can give you more time. If you just have one phase of authorization, we usually just give you 3 years. And of course, until the agreement is fully executed, we cannot authorize any funds. All right, so timing. So you request the agreement. Our office reviews and approves the request. We may go back to you with questions. We send it to the division, they review, they're looking at your schedule. Once we're all in agreement, we'll send out the agreement to the town to be signed. We also add it to our board agenda. So concurrently, the town is looking at the agreement, getting it through its own local process. We're also running it on our board agenda. One does not have to happen before the other. We can have them happen at the same time. When you send the agreement back to us, if it's run on our board agenda, then we take it to the chief engineer and get him to execute it. Right now, we are working on the August board agenda. I think the deadline for that is around July 16th. The deadline for the September board agenda will be about August 15th or 16th. We'll work with you as much as possible to get agreements on the agenda before that September deadline, because that is the absolute last agenda it can be on before we run out of time to authorize the funds.
Marta, can you repeat those dates so everyone here?
Sure. So August agenda is July 16th, which is in 3 weeks. And the September board agenda is going to be whatever that Friday is. I think it's the 15th or the 16th. Our production date is usually, we have to have everything to our people to put it up on our website, 2 weeks before the board date. And the board date is usually the first week in September, first week of the month. And you all have your own process to go through, whatever your local process is.
Marla, real quickly on that, do both entities have to have approved this before authorization is considered effective, both the local and the board?
They have to sign the agreement.
So it has to actually be signed.
Yeah, yeah.
So signatures on both cases by September 19th.
Or earlier. I'm going to actually put in an earlier date than David gave. I know how to procrastinate. I do it very well, but it ends up being a big problem. All right, let me talk a little bit about supplemental agreements. All right, supplemental agreements are needed when the scope of work changes, we get additional funding on the project, we maybe need additional time. They don't really hold up your project delivery process though, so don't look at the supplemental agreement as something that, we can't do any more work until we get this agreement signed. You can still be working on your project while the supplemental agreement is going through its process. What we are not doing are supplemental agreements when the funding source changed, and we made that decision about 2 months ago because there was so much swapping of funds going on, and we really couldn't keep up with it. Plus, they were swapping, and then a month later they were swapping back. So we just said, let's stop doing this. What we're doing is we've changed the language in our agreement to reference the what funding source is programmed. So we're writing the agreement based on what's programmed in this step, but we're putting in a caveat that says the funding source may change at the time of authorization. The funding source really does not affect your project delivery requirements. It doesn't matter if you're getting BGDA, TAP-DA, CMAQ, or any other of these federal flavors of money. Project delivery is still the same. So that it's a distinction without a difference. So when we authorize funds, we are now sending out what we're calling a technical amendment that just identifies, hey, here are the funds, the type of funds that we authorize for this project. We're basing the authorization of funds on whatever is programmed in the STIP at that time. And because the STIP unit can sort of make those funding swaps on the fly, whatever's in the live STIP is what is going to be authorized, regardless of what may have been stated in your original agreement. All right. All right, that was the technical amendment that I talked about. That's what we're going to be sending out, and it will be in addition to a notice to proceed, which is, we were usually just sending out one letter called authorization of funds, and it kind of would give you your next steps. Okay, you've got your PE funding authorized, here are your next steps. So now we're just sending out 2 letters. One's a technical amendment and one is a notice to proceed. All right, so let's talk about funding authorizations. Federal Highways has 3 phases for funding authorizations: preliminary engineering, right-of-way or utility relocation, and then construction. So this is how Federal Highways allows the work to be initiated. And like I said before, you can't proceed with the work until you have this authorization if you want to get reimbursed for it. This last bullet, the authorization request should not occur until the local is ready to begin work. When we authorize funds from Federal Highways, it starts a clock with them. And if they do not see any reimbursements on the project, then they think that the project is inactive. So it's kind of a balancing game. We want to get the funds authorized, but we also want to make sure that you're ready to proceed with that phase of work. If you are not doing work on the project, the division office can charge to the project. We don't necessarily like doing that, but we will do that to keep the funds active. But that's what Federal Highways is looking at. They're looking at reimbursements to track activity on the project. All right, so for preliminary engineering authorization, what we need is an executed agreement signed by both parties. What's eligible for reimbursement under the PE phase is your consultant work. You're going out and hiring a professional engineering firm to provide design or environmental work, or any other kind of pre-construction activities. That's PE goes all the way up to basically the construction phase. All right, right-of-way authorization. What we need is an executed agreement, an approved environmental document, approved right-of-way plans, and an estimate of right-of-way cost. And what's eligible under right-of-way is your actual acquisition, any utility relocation that occurs prior to construction, and then any services that you may need, right-of-way appraisers or negotiators in the process. And then construction authorization, I think y'all are seeing a pattern here. You need the agreement, you need the approved environmental document, the right-of-way, utility, and railroad certification, final plans, the contract proposal, and the engineer's estimate. And what we reimburse under construction is obviously the construction contract, and then any construction, engineering, and inspection services. All right, so what I'm going to do now is kind of quickly, very high level, go through the whole delivery process, just to hit some highlights. I know some of y'all were attending a lunch and learn over the last couple months that we did in Kernersville. 4 different sessions, each 3 to 4 hours, that went through this whole project delivery process. So in 15 minutes, I'm going to do very much the tip of the iceberg. So professional services are those engineering services that you might need for design or construction engineering and inspection. You need to follow our rules, the state law, federal regulations. We have a template for advertisement. You need to follow a qualifications-based selection process. We need to review and concur with the mandate estimate, and your contract needs to include federal contract provisions. Your environmental document must be in compliance with NEPA. Everything is a categorical exclusion document unless it's a much more complex project. Most things will be reviewed and approved at the division. This needs to occur early in the design process. And we do have to do a consultation if the environmental document is more than a year old. So be prepared for that. For those of you who had projects out there for a little while and you might be getting ready to go to construction, check your environmental document, see what the date that it was approved, because we may need to go back and do a consultation. So for design, follow DOT design standards, use our details for wheelchair ramps, curb and gutter. Submit plans early, don't wait till the last minute in case there's a lot of comments on them. Most of the reviews occur at the division. Some for the specialized units do come up to Raleigh. But talk to your division about plan review. Make sure that they are aware of what's going on with your project. Right-of-way, if right-of-way is an eligible expense, make sure you submit your right-of-way plans for review. Again, the division will I don't think they do a location and design approval, but they will issue some level of approval for your right-of-way plans. And we need that before we can authorize the funds. So the right-of-way acquisition must be in conformance with the Uniform Act. This has to occur whether or not you are getting reimbursed with federal funds for right-of-way. So make sure you are aware of that when you're going through your right-of-way process. Basically, you follow the same process whether or not there are federal funds on right-of-way or not. The appraisers must be DOT approved. You must follow the DOT process. They have to be reviewed by DOT. We have to concur in the offer of just compensation. So we do this anyway, whether or not your right-of-way funds are getting reimbursed.
Aren't there a couple exceptions based on amount and for?
Yes, for appraisals, I think it's if it's less than 10,000 or if it's a simple, less complex appraisal, you can do what did I learn? A claim report. That might be the extent of my knowledge on right-of-way, so. All right, utility relocation. Ideally, utilities should be moved prior to letting the construction contract. But if the plans are that the contractor is going to coordinate the utility relocation, then that can occur during the construction phase. But usually we would authorize utility relocation under the right-of-way phase. They go together. All right, so once you've bought all your property and moved all your utilities, you get the certification. And what we've been doing, I believe in both Division 10 and 12, is the right-of-way agent will provide the right-of-way certification, which states that you have control of all the right-of-way, you've followed all the appropriate process, and the right-of-way is basically, people have been moved, they need to be moved. We're getting the cities to provide the utility and the railroad certification, which again just says we've moved the utilities, or there are no utilities, or we have a plan for moving utilities in the construction contract. Same with the railroad certification, that you all are certifying that we have coordinated with the railroad if we needed to for any conflicts with the railroad. And I think that's working out all right for y'all to provide that part. The contract proposal is set up pretty much like a DOT contract. We have a whole website dedicated to setting up a local government contract proposal that follows DOT process. So please use that website. We have all the federal provisions that need to be included. You'll have an engineer's estimate that you'll develop, and of course that needs to reference the spec book or special provisions. And then we use the engineer's estimate to set the DBE goal on the project. So you cannot advertise until you have construction funds authorized. We must review and concur in your proposal to award a construction contract. Basically, you take it to your council, you say, we're ready to award it pending DOT review. Again, we have template letters, we give you a whole list of things that you need to submit when you're requesting concurrence. And then you administer the construction contract per the NCDOT construction manual. The division office will provide oversight through construction. The projects must meet material certification requirements, and we concur with your acceptance of the project from the contractor before the final reimbursement can be made. And reimbursement can occur throughout the project, so as funds are authorized, you perform work, you can submit for reimbursement. And we do want reimbursements to come in at least every 6 months to keep the project active.
If an agreement between the local entity and the MPO in order to receive the MPO's money is, we'll say 50-50 split, we could still ask for 80% reimbursement up until we reach the amount of money that the MPO authorized for us, right?
So we would prefer to put that in the agreement. So if the MPO said, we awarded this funding based on the fact that you, the town, were putting in 50%, then we would write the agreement with reimbursement of eligible costs at 50%. Yeah. Unless the MPO wants to say, we're willing to reimburse it at 80%. And to me, I would love it to be all 80%. 50-50 or 75-25. It gets very confusing. And when you switch funding reimbursements in midstream and you say, well, another MPO, which will remain nameless, gives them funding at 80%, and then they give them additional funding at 50%. So then you got to keep track. Okay, well, I've used all my 80% money, and now I'm starting on my 50% money. It's very confusing.
Seems easier that you just leave it at 80% up to X amount.
I agree. And then because you all are on the hook for everything over the 100%, the 80, you're committed to the 20%, and once you reach that amount, you know, you're on the hook forever. But I think that's your MPO that has to, I mean, if you have a process of giving points and awarding projects and say, hey, we're able to put in a higher match, and you get the project based on that, but then you get your reimbursement at 80%, somehow that seems, I don't know.
The money, the dollars are still the same, unless we break the project significantly less.
Under, right, yeah,
Right.
yeah, then you come out ahead. Right, yeah, I see that trend. Yeah, so I put 80% in here, but it's whatever's in your agreement. We'll have the percentage reimbursement. All right, and then once the project's done, we do our closeout. We do all these things. We'll get a final voucher date from Federal Highways. That will start your records retention period. It's usually 3 years from the date of final voucher date that you need to keep all your records, because they are subject to audit by a whole host of people. Oops. All right, so August 16th. Okay, I did put it in here. Last date to get an agreement on the September board agenda. I put September 13th. I know David said the 20th, but I'm kind of nervous about waiting till the 20th. We might, y'all shoot for the 13th, and if we have room to get it in by the 20th, Federal Highway shuts down. Our fiscal people shut down even before that. They're putting in an earlier deadline, so I'm giving you an even earlier one. And then last year's presentation, we talked about the bonus allocation, and June 1st, I think, was the date we said to get the authorization request in, because that has to be authorized by June 30th. All right, any questions or comments on this part before I just do real quickly on the TIP agreements?
Can you go back to the voucher?
This?
Yeah, I was right inside it.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
So when she issues that starts the retention period?
Yeah.
Yeah. And don't store your records in a basement that's subject to flooding. It has happened. All right, so our TIP agreements, we do these with municipalities if the DOT, this is a DOT-let project. If the project is within a municipality and you all request some sort of betterment, you're participating in the project costs, you're asking for us to relocate your utilities, or you have maintenance responsibilities. So we'll need an agreement signed that will outline all these items if they're applicable, and we need that agreement before we can advertise the project and get authorization. So I just bring that up because sometimes people working on local projects also work with the agreements. Same with the utility agreements. This thing's very sensitive. If you've got municipal utilities, water and sewer, and you've asked for the department to relocate them as part of our construction contract, we'll do an agreement with you to outline the cost share, and/or if you ask us to design the utility relocation, that would also be a cost for you all. So sometimes these agreements come through our central utilities unit, sometimes they come out from the division office. So your responsibilities for these agreements, make sure you understand what's going on with the scope and the financial commitment. Most of these agreements are written for estimated cost, and then we will bill the actual cost. You need to coordinate whatever approval process you have on your side. Non-POW bill entities, so basically any non-municipalities, have the ability to pay, POW bill, so municipalities that get POW bill funding, you can pay at the end of the project. Once we bill you, you can pay. A non-POW bill entity, a county, or we're working with a private developer, they need to pay. We usually do it when the agreement's signed, but we're trying to move to doing it when the contract's let, because sometimes the agreements are signed so far in advance of letting the contract. We are offering an opportunity to pay in advance of final billing, and if you want to give us your money, we'll be glad to take it at any time. So in the agreements, it will say, we'll bill you when the project's done, but if you want to manage your cash flow and give us money ahead of time, that is perfectly acceptable. All right, any questions or comments on that part?
Marta, I'd like to go back and talk about the proposals for construction. Of course, most call that project manual around here. When you start trying to write special provisions and then your line item estimates, you start trying to put your numbering system instead of the NCDOT special provisions. That adds time to review because they're trying to figure out what you're doing and how it ties into the special provisions that are provided on the website. So just take that in mind when y'all are writing. I think we just had an ITS project that has a lot of special provisions that were written. It takes a little bit longer to review those.
Right, that's a good point, and I will just reiterate, use our website. If you go to the local projects website, there's a link to the contract, a bid proposal. I know it's called 15 different things, but once you go to that link, it has everything laid out for you, and I think it's a really good resource. Anything else? There's my contact information if you need to get in touch with me. All right.